So companies enter into all sorts of material contracts. Some are of the type that need to be filed with the SEC pretty quickly. Some can wait to be filed for a bit. Today on Zippy Point.
Quick Zips by Zippy Point.
Quick and dirty. I'm Brock Romanek and I'm a big fan of use. So if you're not familiar with the SEC's rules and regulations, it can be confusing to understand when something that is material is required to be filed with the SEC and thus made publicly known. The upshot is that a public company does not have a duty to disclose something unless a certain rule or regulation dictates its disclosure at a certain time, or unless the company has a duty to update some information that it already has out there in the public domain. That duty to update is a court-driven doctrine, a judicial doctrine. So the SEC's real-time filings, which aren't truly real-time, but the closest thing to it, come in the form of Form 8Ks. If you look at the SEC's Form 8K requirements, which are in the form of the Form 8K itself, along with the 34 Act rules and some Corp Fin staff interpretations, the form itself has a number of items that list the topics, the issues, the thresholds that trigger a Form 8K filing. And when a Form 8K filing is triggered by one of those items, the company has 4 business days to file a Form K with the SEC, providing that disclosure about the topic required by the form, and that information becomes public knowledge. So certain types of material contracts are triggers under a number of these items in the Form 8K. The most obvious one, the one that covers the waterfront, is a trigger of a material definitive contract under item 1.01 of Form 8K. Now I have a 20-minute Vid-Guide that delves into the specifics of that item 101, a link to which is below. But the upshot is that an item 101 8K is required when a company enters into a material agreement that is not in the ordinary course of business, although some ordinary things still can be triggers, so it can be confusing. So see that Vid-Guide to truly become a master in this area. Some compensatory items, compensatory arrangements made with the CEO, the CFO, or other named executive officers get filed under item 502E of Form 8K, and that might be another material type of contract that gets disclosed. So there's some overlap between item 101 and item 502E. See my separate Vid-Guide about item 502E 8Ks, a link to which is below. So I should be more clear here. These 8Ks require companies to disclose that these material contracts exist and provide a brief summary of them. They don't actually require the filing of the material contract itself, at least not yet. They do get filed eventually. Although Form 8K requires exhibits for certain items like item 2.02 regarding earnings release to be filed furnished with the Form 8K itself, many other 8K items, including item 101 about material contracts, give the company the choice of filing the exhibit with the Form 8K itself or as an exhibit to the corresponding periodic report. Periodic report meaning the next quarterly report on Form 10Q that the company files, or maybe the next quarterly report for that company is really its annual report, the Form 10K, because the material contract was entered into the fourth quarter of that company's fiscal year. Item 601A4 of Regulation SK provides that material contracts and plans of reorganization, plans of liquidation and succession, those are also material contracts, must be filed as an exhibit to the report corresponding to the date the agreement was executed or entered into. And this Corp Fin staff interpretation notes that instruction 2 to item 601B10 of Regulation 8K and provides the same thing, that exhibit 10 material contracts can wait to be filed for when the due date is of the corresponding periodic report. So if you're looking to review the material contract itself, not just read a brief description of it, you may have to wait a bit. The Form 10Q due date depends on how big a company you are. For the larger ones, for large accelerated and accelerated filers, the due date is 40 calendar days from the quarter end. For all other companies, non-accelerated filers, it's 45 days after the quarter end. The 10K due date is 60 calendar days from the fiscal year end for large accelerated filers, 75 days for accelerated filers, and 90 days for non-accelerated filers. I have a separate Vid-Guide explaining the difference between these accelerated classifications, what the thresholds are, a link to which is beneath this video. So if a material contract is signed after a period end, but before the due date of that corresponding periodic report, the company has a choice of when to file that material contract as an exhibit. The company may file the contract with the next periodic report, which corresponds to that prior period, or wait to file the contract with the periodic report for the period in which the contract is signed. So let me explain with an example. A company has a 12/31 fiscal year end and enters into a material contract in April. It may file the material contract early with its upcoming Form 10Q, which will be due in May, even though the exhibit filing isn't officially due until its next Form 10Q, which means that would be due in August. So if the company did not voluntarily file the contract earlier, there would be a 4-month lag between reading about that material contract in the Form 8K that was filed in April and finally seeing the actual contract filed as an exhibit to a 10Q that's filed in August. That's a long wait in this impatient ADD world. The good news, however, is that many companies voluntarily file their material contracts with the earlier periodic report if they don't file them as an exhibit to the 8K itself, which many companies do. And they do that for administrative convenience so they don't forget to file the exhibit later. But some companies don't. They don't have to, and they wait. So if you're looking for a material contract filed by a company, your best bet is to start with the exhibit index for the latest Form 10K filed by that company with the SEC, and then look at the exhibit index for the latest Form 10Q that's filed. As noted in this CorpFin staff interpretation, a full exhibit index isn't required for quarterly reports filed on Form 10Q. The 10Q exhibit index can be limited just to those exhibits that are actually filed with or incorporated by reference newly into that 10Q. But some companies do include their full exhibit index in each 10Q. It's just easier to do for them, easier to keep track of what's going on, particularly if the company doesn't have many exhibits to list in its index. So it's just easy just to cut and paste from quarter to quarter and update. And the cool thing with exhibit indexes these days is that they have direct links to the exhibits that are incorporated by reference into that periodic report. Companies were not required to do this until just a few years ago, as crazy as that sounds. So see my separate vid guide about updating the exhibit index for 10Qs and 10Ks. It's a pain to do both from a diligence standpoint for the in-house lawyer and from a practical standpoint of maintaining a long laundry list of exhibits if your company does indeed have a long list. A link to that vid guide is below. Let me know what you think.